15th of November 2021.
I've been put on this planet to protect wildlife.
Crikey! Danger, danger, danger.
From news.com.au.
I'm Andrew Bucklow, and I've got news for you. G'day there, thank you so much for joining me. Steve Irwin was a superstar. In the late 90s and early 2000s, he became a household name here in Australia and overseas thanks to his TV show The Crocodile Hunter. He was kind of like Australia's unofficial ambassador to the world. He just won people over with his gentle nature, his endless enthusiasm, and of course, his fairly memorable catchphrase.
Crikey! 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 Did you see that?
He was such a passionate conservationist whose mission in life was just to save wildlife, which is a passion that he's passed on to both of his kids, Bindi and Robert. Now, sadly, Steve's life was tragically cut short in 2006 when he was killed by a stingray on the Great Barrier Reef. But today is actually Steve Irwin Day, a day to honour the life and legacy of one of Australia's brightest stars, and that is what we're planning to do in this episode. We're going to chat to one of his best mates, a guy named John Stainton, who spent 15 years travelling the world with Steve. He's going to tell us how Steve saved his life and the life of his TV crew members on multiple occasions, and he'll reveal which actor Steve wanted to play him if a movie ever got made about his life. Now, John was also one of the few people on the boat with Steve on the day he died. He'll go into detail about that horrific day and reveals for the first time that he actually had a feeling something was going to go wrong.
In fact, 3 weeks before we were lined up to shoot, I actually rang Discovery and said, look, I don't feel good about this thing. I'd rather call it off. No, I don't want to go ahead with it.
John, you created the TV show The Crocodile Hunter and spent more than a decade filming Steve all around the world as he got up close and personal with all sorts of animals. I've heard that he actually saved your life and the lives of your crew members on a number of occasions. Can you tell me what happened?
Oh, everybody in the crew always trusted him implicitly, including me. Everyone felt very secure. There was times whenever we were shooting, say, for example, a snake, a really long, vicious snake, he'd always say at the end of his piece, he'd say, I'm not going to let it go. Well, when he let it go, we were, as a crew, in front of the snake, and so everyone would just die and freeze because it's going to go right past you. You know, it's going to go somewhere near you because we're blocking the way. So that was always a threat. But there was one day I was filming with him. We were doing an Egyptian cobra in Africa. It was really aggressive. It was actually standing up a 1.5 meters high and attacking at him and all that stuff. And I was shooting the second camera. I was used to shoot second camera. I had a camera that I'd just always be with him and I'd always be alongside him or close to him so that I could get close-up shots of the animals. And so in this particular instance with the Egyptian cobra, it started to move towards me. I was on the end of a zoom, which meant I couldn't see how close it was. And I just wasn't aware of the fact that it was heading towards me. And the next thing I could feel was Steve's back on my chest as he jumped straight in front of me and threw me backwards. I went into the air and down again because he'd stepped in front of me between the snake, which was coming towards me.
Wow.
So it was amazing because I would have probably, in where we were in the middle of nowhere, been very difficult to get help, medical help. Another time for me was with Komodo dragons in Indonesia.
Oh, yes.
And we'd just got off a boat. I'd hired a fishing boat we were going to live on for 10 days to do all the islands. There was only 2 islands where they lived, but to live on the boat so we could access where the dragons lived. And we'd just come off the boat, up the jetty, onto the land on Rincha Island. No one had actually told us or told the crew, not to have any food on you because they've got sensitive smell, hugely acute sensitive smell. And as we saw 2 not far off the jetty, they're in the mangroves hunting for food in the mangroves. And as we came, we started filming. Steve started talking about them as they were behind him. And, just all about them, da-da-da. We were filming, I'm filming, cameraman's filming. And suddenly they started running towards us. They passed Steve and they running towards us. Well, one of the cameramen had food or some lunch in his bag of chicken or something or other from the boat, and they could smell it, so they were heading straight to the cameraman. They got so close to the cameraman, and he had a large camera on his shoulder. He threw that up in the air, and it went up and landed and smashed. He took off, and then it came to me. because I was standing next to it, and I had a smaller camera, and all I could do was put the camera down in front of it and grab the lens. It took the lens hood off, and then in the meantime, Steve had by that time got around and grabbed me and threw me out of the way too, and then we just had to get out of the place. We were all, hiding from the two Komodo dragons that were looking for the food.
Oh.
He would always step in if there was any time that something looked like it was going to be too dangerous.
I've read in the past that you said Steve just wanted to help people wherever he went. Do you have any behind-the-scenes stories from your years on the road together that you could share that demonstrate his desire to help others?
He was always very, very kind to people, and particularly in poorer countries, he would always go out of his way to do as much as he could for them and help anybody. Like he was just very generous, always concerned about the wildlife. And for example, we'd see on roadside, places, you'd see people that have all these animals like cobras that have defanged and, doing the acts with the cobras. And there was a couple of cases, one particular that sticks in my mind, where they had a baby macaque monkey, and they'd take the father away from it, so that would make the baby go hysterical and have to perform to get back on its dad's back.
Oh, how awful.
And it's so cruel, all this stuff. And Steve, he'd say to me, because he never used to carry any money, he'd say, well, how much money you got on you? How much money? I'd say, they've got $1,000 or something. Give it to me. And he'd pay all these people, and he'd buy all the animals, and then we'd get in the car and we'd go and let them out. He'd go and release them all. It was unbelievable. That was the best part about him. He'd nothing. He'd see snakes in markets, in cages, and he'd buy them, and then we'd be in the car with them and taking them out bush to let them go again. Unreal. It was amazing.
The Crocodile Hunter was such a hugely successful show. It aired in more than 130 countries around the world, and Steve became a household name. And he wasn't just popular with viewers, but he was also a hit with celebrities. I've seen pictures online of him with Bruce Willis. He was on Jay Leno's talk show a lot. What was he like around celebrities? Did he get kind of flustered?
That's a good question, because he loved all the guys, and like all those, the superheroes quite well. The one recall I had was we were at a celebrity sort of one of those things where you're going on the red carpet, but everyone gets held in a room, in a celebrity room, until they go on the carpet, and then they go into the show or whatever was happening. And in this particular room in LA, in a celeb room, there was every star you could imagine. Will Smith was there, Matt Damon was there, everybody.
Oh, wow.
And they're his heroes. He used to love Matt Damon, and he used to love Will Smith. And Eric Banner, he loved Eric Banner, and all of those sort of guys that were superheroes. He was talking to another couple of actors, and I got a tap on the shoulder from an agent and one of the PR guys, and he said to me, do you mind? He said, I know I don't want to disturb Steve, but my clients have asked if I could ask Steve to come down to meet them. They'd love to meet him. And I said, oh, yeah, he's really busy at the moment. Who are your clients? And he said, Will Smith and Matt Damon. And I thought, I didn't want to show any shock or surprise. I just said, well, wait a minute, I'll have to see if he can get away. And I leaned over to Steve in the break of his conversation. I said, Matt Damon and Will Smith want to meet you. I could see his eyes pop. You could see him go cold for a minute, because he loved those guys. He really thought Matt Damon was fabulous. And he looked at me as much as say, God, are you joking? So I said, oh, yes, he'll be down in a minute as soon as he can finish here. So we went down to meet those two. He had them in fits of laughter.
On September 4 in 2006, John, Steve and their crew were on the Great Barrier Reef aboard Steve's expedition and research vessel called Croc 1. They were there to film a Discovery Channel documentary called Ocean's Deadliest. But the weather was bad that day, and it was decided filming for the doco couldn't go ahead. Steve, well, he didn't like to sit still. He grabbed his cameraman, Justin Lyons, and they set off from Croc 1 on an inflatable boat to do some filming for a different project. After a few minutes, they spotted a stingray in the water. Here's what Justin had to say on Studio 10.
So we're only in chest-deep water. We slipped over the side of the inflatable, and we just started shooting. We'd been shooting it for a few minutes. We stood up and said, one last shot, you swim up from behind the animal, and I'll try and get a shot of it swimming away. I had the camera on. I thought, this is going to be a great shot. It's going to be in the doco for sure. Fantastic. And all of a sudden, it propped on its front, and started stabbing wildly with its tail. Hundreds of strikes in a few seconds. He thought it had punctured his lung, and he stood up out of the water and screamed, "It's punctured me lung." Within a few seconds, the inflatable that had been motoring about 30 metres away was there. So we threw him into the boat. We're saying to him things like, "Think of your kid, Steve, hang on, hang on, hang on." And he just sort of calmly looked up at me and said, "I'm dying." And that was the last thing he said.
John, what sort of mood was Steve in earlier that day before the incident?
That's a hard one. Look, it's a very difficult subject for me, but we were making. I'd come up with this documentary idea to do a series, just a whole episode on Ocean's Deadliest. So everything that was in the water, in the ocean, that could kill you, which is everything from sharks to blue ray octopuses, bottlefish, irrigangi. So it was an ominous show, and I felt uncomfortable about it when we were sort of going into the production. In fact, 3 weeks before we were lined up to shoot, I actually rang Discovery and said, "Look, I don't feel good about this thing. I'd rather call it off and stop it. I don't want to go ahead with it." And they said to me, "Well, look, it's a bit too late. We're paying for this, we're paid for that, and there's a lot of money gone out already." And Philip Costello was coming out to join us on that doco, so they paid his fees. There was a big commitment already being made. So I thought we have to go ahead with it. But I felt uncomfortable from the beginning of the year. From one day, I just had this premonition in January that it would be the last day of my life this year. I just had this really weird feeling. And so much so that I went and got tests and went through CAT scans, and I thought I have to have something wrong with me, and did a lot of tests over a lot of months, and nothing came back. And I even made a will that year in June before we went on that trip. I thought, I've never had a will, but something was so strong with me. Steve was in quite severe pain because he'd broken something in his neck, and he was having huge pain with his neck, which wasn't helping. He was fine, he was like normal, but he made a speech a couple of days before we started the shoot, and he made a little speech to all the crew that were up there catching crocs for his research trip, which I joined at the end of it with our crew to do the Deadliest movie. And it was really weird. He was sort of thanking them all for being who they were and for helping him and doing it. It was like a finale speech. It was very, very weird. And I had an aura over me that something was wrong. But it's just life, isn't it? It's something. Yeah. You never know what things are going to do to you in life.
Steve obviously went for a dive that day and to do some filming. When did you realise that something had gone wrong in the water?
Well, it was straight away, because they radioed back and told me straight away. On the boat, I was on the main boat, and that was it. That was it. I didn't think it was real. I didn't think that was going to happen. I didn't think... the radio call was Steve's been hit by a stingray. That was it. So I didn't know that it was that serious or anything at all. I didn't know how serious it was, to be honest. And then they said the boat was on its way back with him. And that was it. I was shocked then. I didn't realise how serious that was.
When did the severity of the injury hit you?
Probably days later. I think the whole thing just became a blur, and everybody was, it was just a blur. Something you try and block out of your brain, and so you don't have to think about it or see it in your life. So I try not to ever go that far with it. And it was just a very, very sad circumstance. It was an accident, and it was unfortunately happened on that day. It's awful. Wrong time at the wrong place.
Is it right that you were the one that had to make the call to the family?
Yes, I made all the calls to everybody.
I cannot imagine having to deliver news like that to a family.
Andrew, I can't neither. I think when as anyone that will know, when they're in a state of grieving and sadness and shock, that you have to do what you have to do. inside of you comes up and says, you've got to do this. I can remember that night I couldn't sleep. We were in a Cairns hotel and all the crew were there in the hotel. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I rang every one of them. And I said, you have to go back on clock 1 in the morning and all go back and have to finish. I can't go, but you're going to have to finish this doc. I have to do it for Steve.
Oh, wow. That must have been incredibly hard for the crew to pull themselves together and finish the documentary.
It was a horrible thing because they were all in shock as well. Everyone said, oh, yes, if that's what you want, we'll do it. I said, well, Steve, I don't want him to lose his life for a doco that was never going to get made or won't be finished. And it was almost, we only had a couple of scenes left to do. But I knew that he would be very disappointed with me if I hadn't completed the job. No matter what happened, he always used to say, look, if ever I die, get hit by any animal, just keep filming. Don't waste the shots. Just keep filming. God almighty.
John, what do you think Steve could have gone on to do if he hadn't died that day in 2006? What do you think he could have achieved?
I used to say to him, Stevie, you could go anywhere you want to go in life, and if you want to stay doing what you're doing, I'll keep you there until you're 75 or 80. You'll be the next David Attenborough, because he was so knowledgeable about wildlife, and as he got older, he would have matured into a recognisable force in wildlife.
Absolutely.
Around the world. That's where I saw him going. And he would have been the next David Attenborough. Absolutely.
You obviously spent so much time with Steve. You were one of his best mates. You're obviously very close to Terry and the family as well because you spent so much time with them. Are you still close to Terry and the kids?
No, we've all gone different ways. It's just one of those things, by the time Steve went, I went on for a couple of years more, but I didn't really want to keep doing that style of stuff all the time because I'd sort of run out of steam with it. It had taken an awful lot of energy and a lot of toll. Yeah, it was just, just time to move on. Time to move on.
You're a producer and a director. If there was going to be a movie made about Steve's life, is there an actor you have in mind who you think would be perfect to play Steve on the big screen?
That's a funny question because we've shared the red carpet. When I say we, I'd always be behind Steve by foot. Or on the red carpet in LA at some reception or something or other. And there's a lot of other celebs on the carpet, and he just saw Eric Bana going through, and he just broke rank and went straight over to Eric and said, Eric, if ever they make a movie on my life, this was the year before he died, if ever they make a movie on my life, you've got to promise me you're going to play me on the middle of the red carpet. It was just a breakout. He used to do all that sort of stuff. It was really very instantaneous. Anything he done was straight instantaneous. You wouldn't think about it and say, John, could you write him an email and tell him I want to be happy for him to play there? No, he just broke ranks and straight over to him.
Eric Bana as Steve Irwin.
Yeah, that was nearly, 14 years ago, 15 years ago. I think all of those guys that he would have had lined up in his mind that could have played him would probably be now far too old. And I'm not sure, of the actors in that 35, 40-year-old category or age group that would transfer, to Steve's character. I don't know. It's very funny that that could come up one day. I'm sure it'll come up one day.
Well, it's Steve Irwin Day today, a day to honour Steve and all of his achievements. How do you think he'd like to be remembered?
I think he'd like to be remembered by people caring about animals, to be honest, to give their thought to all the animals that are suffering in the world and all the poaching that's going on and all the sacrifice that animals take in land clearing, like the Borneo orangutans that are losing their habitat and they're going to be extinct in another 20 years or 25 years max. There's so many animals that he was so concerned about. I've got so many pieces of video with him crying, hugging animals that he knows were going to die. that it would really be depressing for you to watch. It's so uplifting to think that he was very, very soft, really, really soft.
John, Steve was an amazing man, and I want to thank you for taking the time to tell us some stories about his life. I really appreciate it.
No, well, thank you very much for letting me talk about him. It's terrific. Thank you.
For more information about Steve Irwin Day, you can check out australiazoo.com.au. And that brings to an end the first ever episode of I've Got News for You. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give us a follow, and I'll chat to you again tomorrow. Take care.